so I think we'll make a start, and if people want to join in later on, they're more than able to. Okay, so welcome to this week's Smart Solution Showcase webinar. These webinars are an opportunity for tech companies to come along and present their technologies and demonstrate ways where their technologies can be used by towns to make to enable towns to make more data-driven decisions. And joining us today is Tiernan from Hello Lamp Post. Hello Lamp Post is an interactive platform to enable communities to connect with their community, and it also provides data for the town as well from their citizens. So yeah, I'm joined by Tiernan, and I'll let him introduce Hello Lamp Post a bit better than I. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function. We do have a time at the end for questions as well, but if you've got specific ones, feel free to pop them into the chat, and I'll make sure that they get asked. Okay, well, with that being said then, Tiernan, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Thomas. Yeah, first of all, thanks everyone for joining, and really happy to be here. As Thomas says, my name's Tiernan. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Hello Lamp Post. I guess I've got a few slides, which I'll do a screen share in a sec. Hopefully it gives enough information, but yeah, also, like Thomas said, we've allowed a bit of time for questions at the end. So I will just share what I'm going to aim to do is just cover off a little bit more detail about what Hello Lamp Post is, the whys, both from an organizational perspective, but also from a citizen general public perspective, a little bit about some different deployments and installations that we've done around the world, including Hello Port in Portpanog. And then just kind of how people get started with deploying Hello Lamp Post. So a little bit about what we are. So we're a digital communication or engagement platform. In principle, what we do is we make any place or space interactive. So that might be, providing an interactive layer to a statue, to benches, buildings, bus shelters. Really, the possibilities are endless in terms of what to make interactive, and what that looks like is like you're seeing on screen, usually kind of branded to the local council, but this one wasn't. But in principle, it's an object that comes to life to provide people with local information. So that might be the history of a statue, for example, or information behind a construction hoarding. But then also those objects are asking people questions via that friendly chat functionality. I'll go into a bit more detail, but I thought it'd be maybe just interesting or useful to take a step back on where kind of we came from as a concept and a company. So back in 2013, Hello Lamp Post was born as a concept, and it was born out of an award called the Playable City Award, which is run by an organisation in Bristol called Watershed, and they created this award really to as part of the kind of smart cities movement, but to encourage concepts and technologies and ideas that were more people-centered, more people-focused, rather than another piece of hardware or another sensor. And it was literally, that was the brief, to try and encourage ideas that would kind of push smart cities forward, which were more people-centered. So we won that inaugural award in 2013, and really originally it was born out of kind of a couple of observations and frustrations. So one observation was we have our physical environments in villages, towns, cities that have existed and continue to evolve. And then on the other side, we have this kind of network that kind of exists, the evolution of the internet, but they haven't really merged. And our idea was, well, why couldn't we just add a digital layer to what's already there rather than having to retrofit? That was kind of one observation. The other one was these existing objects and pieces of infrastructure act as kind of hyperlocal reference points, if you like. And our original concept was utilizing maintenance codes that already exist on objects. So that was kind of one observation. The other one was that we all use and move through towns, cities, neighborhoods, communities, and pass these areas and places that trigger opinions, feedback, memories, thoughts, but rarely, if ever, are they shared or left anywhere. And all of those opinions and memories and feedback is so valuable to other members of the community, but also people, who have jurisdiction or are making decisions about those areas. So the original concept was, well, what if we could create this interactive layer, which was almost acting like a digital journal mapped across the city, where objects would learn from people and share those ideas or responses anonymously with other users that would go and interact. And that's kind of how it started. And it was really only meant to be, a one-off digital art installation, if you like. And then slowly, kind of towns and cities were getting in touch to ask if they could use the service to engage with their communities and their audiences. And then that's kind of how it grew and where we kind of came from. And what that, I guess, enabled us is, because that's where we started, we've always been very user focused on what's going to make it, what's going to enable the best user experience. And that kind of remains the same. And that's why it still remains as a very friendly, familiar conversational platform and very low barrier to entry. So how does it work these days? So we work with organizations like local authorities, property developers, etc., to place very subtle signage on objects. And there can be any object, and all a user has to do is know that the object is there, scan the QR code or follow the instruction that's on there, and then they are into a chat-based conversation, which is usually over SMS, but we can do deployments within WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, mobile browsers. So the user doesn't have to download any apps or have an account or anything like that. And then straight away, the kind of object will respond. And this is kind of a brief example. So on the left, this is actually in Manchester in Media City. So this is one of their objects, one of their many objects they've activated. And as you can see, it's very friendly in nature. So objects will do things like recognize if they've spoken to that person before, or if they've spoken to another object before. No conversation will be the same. So it's always feeling like a fresh interaction, but they will set contexts like, I'm here to chat to you about the local area and hear your thoughts. Or if it's a statue, it might say, I'm here to give you the history about this area and myself. And like you can see, this object has asked someone what improvements they would like to see around here. And that person has said, I'd like to see pedestrianised areas and green spaces. So that just gives you a feel of the kind of tone of conversations. And like I said, it's very low barrier to entry. The QR code is essentially a shortcut to doing the instruction on the sign there. So it still functions on SMS, but all they have to do is scan the QR code and hit send. On the flip side, for the organization, so our customers that we work with, we are constantly doing the aggregation, the analytics on what people are saying, how they're saying it, how often, where, etc. And the purpose being behind that is really to improve decision making, make it more efficient, make it, in some ways more automated, but above anything else, hear from wider, sometimes harder to reach audiences. So this diagram just sort of demonstrates that journey is people are interacting with activated objects, which flows through our service and our platform. And then we're able to distill those insights in a number of different ways, which I'll show in a sec. So this is what I mean by the distillation. So as part of our service, we provide live dashboards, which is what you can see on the right, where it's everything from kind of live sentiment on messages coming through. You can dive into individual responses to questions being asked. You can filter out, insights or satisfaction for a high street or whatever that object is. And also see live keywords and trends that are coming out. On the flip side, on the left, as part of our service as well, our account management team are constantly doing deep dives into responses, pulling out trends and providing those reports in a format that's going to be most useful to the councils or the property developers or the universities or whoever we're working with. In terms of the bigger picture as to why we're doing this. So we want to enable more voices on the table. There's a huge gap between decision makers and the end users, especially with population densities increasing. And we're seeing that kind of issue across a multitude of sectors. So most of our customers are local authorities, but we're starting to work with universities, central government agencies, which I'll show you an example of, hospital campuses, attractions, workplaces, shopping malls, and they all have this issue of lack of capacity and tools to really engage with wider audiences, and certainly harder to reach audiences. Thomas, I'm not too sure how I'm doing for time, but just shout at me if I'm running over.
No, you're fine for time.
Cool.
We've got an hour, so there's really no limit.
Right. And yeah, the underlying mission for us is really to try and improve and make local democracy more efficient. So, how do we seamlessly allow people to provide their voices in a practical and constructive way, and how do we make it easier for local decision makers to understand that almost at the touch of a button, so that they're making decisions which represent the wider communities, but also improving the decision making efficiency. So I've kind of already covered the why, but in terms of why we're doing this in terms of specific use cases, so we're working on projects like participatory budgeting, wayfinding, visitor satisfaction, consultations on things like redevelopment, improving service delivery like transport, so providing people with live bus times even when it's in a really rural community, culture and tourism, so things like trails within towns and high streets, and to be honest, use cases and projects we are continually surprised at on a weekly basis. When we started opening up from kind of COVID lockdowns, a lot of local authorities that we work with were wanting to use the platform to make sure that people were reminded about safe distancing and feeling comfortable with coming back to the high street, but also understanding their sentiment. So how are they feeling about coming back to the shops, and what would make them feel more comfortable, etc. Just in terms of, I guess, where we've worked and how we've worked, as I say, most of our customers have been local authorities, but we've worked in a multitude of different languages, and I'll show that example in Hello Port with Welsh. But yeah, we've worked in Kazakhstan and India, and we've got live deployments in Vancouver and Sydney, and kind of all over the world. And really the benefit across the board that we try and achieve is, and then we do see, is increased community feedback, and typically by 40% or more compared to the status quo of what those engagement and consultations look like. Cutting community engagement costs or comms costs when compared to things like town hall meetings and clipboard surveys and marketing campaigns. The other one is reaching harder to reach audiences. So because Hello Lamp Post can be geographically focused and geographically targeted, a lot of councils find that they're increasing the engagement from harder to reach audiences, combined with the fact that there's a lot lower barrier to entry. It's 98% of UK population have an SMS enabled phone and are familiar with that technology. The other comparison is it's always on. So we often describe activated objects as almost like nodes in the community. So they're always there, they're always providing different information, asking different questions, and it's 24/7. And then the flip side, which I showed you before, is kind of real-time analytics and insight on people's sentiment and opinions, so that whether it's something as small as the cleanliness of a street, or how people envisage their local area in the next 40, 50 years, that's all done in real time. A couple of examples for us. So one is the Olympic Park in London, which is actually where I am right now. We've worked with them for a couple of years now. And this is a good example of, I guess, the variety of objects that can be activated, but also the variety of use cases that can exist in parallel. So I don't know how much Thomas has shared, but we work on a continuous license basis or an annual license basis, and that license can contain a multitude of use cases. So for the Olympic Park, for example, as you're probably familiar, there's a lot of redevelopment going on since the Olympics. It's becoming almost like a mini city in itself. And consequently, there's a huge mixture between attractions, residential, office, retail across the park, combined with a lot of redevelopment construction sites going on. So there's this kind of mixed priority with LLDC, who are effectively a local authority, where they're trying to service a multitude of audiences and trying to improve the satisfaction for all of those audiences. So we've activated everything from kind of stadiums to benches to parks to trails across the park, all with the idea of educating people about what's available in the park, allowing them to explore more of the park, so increasing footfall and dwell times, whilst also enabling LLDC to have a gauge and improve visitor satisfaction and resident satisfaction. The other thing that the platform can do, I suppose, which I haven't mentioned, is act as like an automated FAQ. So if someone asks the platform or an object, what is there to do, or what shops are available at the park, our system can synonymize any kind of request like that. And if there's an answer in the knowledge base that we can pull from, it will provide that information live to that user, or redirect them to a link for more information. And then the flip side to the Olympic Park is where all those redevelopment and construction sites are happening, there's signage call to action on the hoarding. So like I said, any object or place, or entity can be made interactive. So, it's a case of speak to East Bank, which is one of the construction sites, to find out what's going on there. So it will provide information about, what's going to be there, the timelines. People can ask questions about those. But then it's also asking people questions from that object to the user, which is then being fed back to LLDC so they can understand people's needs and wants. Another one that we're working with is Windsor and Maidenhead Council. These numbers are slightly outdated, but again, it's a great example of a complete mixed use of Hello Lamp Post. So again, they've activated what we class as generic objects, so benches and lampposts across the town centre and residential areas. Again, just getting a feel for people's ongoing wants and needs. But then, as you can imagine, there's huge kind of cultural and historical assets throughout the town, which they've also activated. So that on the picture is Queen Victoria's statue outside Windsor Castle, which has been activated, which will tell people about the history of the statue and the history of area, whilst also asking people questions. And then the third one for Windsor is really about transport. So things like activating bus shelters or bus stops, where people can ask, when is the next bus route 23 coming, and it will provide those live bus times because we've plugged into a live bus API. Another one, this is in Sydney. So we're working with the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust, which is part of the Sydney government. And we've activated areas all around Sydney Harbour. Again, completely mixed use, but a good example of utilising Hello Lamp Post data to inform decisions. So one of their areas and they'll be replicating this across the areas, but one of the areas they were doing a consultation on about how to improve it over the next 10 to 20 years. So they used Hello Lamp Post as part of those comms and communication and consultation. And that data over the course of a couple of months during that consultation fed into a visioning exercise, and that has now fed into actual plans and going into construction. So it's a really nice example of Hello Lamp Post feedback data actually shaping the future of an area, both for visitors and for residents. This is another one of Media City, which I mentioned earlier. I guess for those who may not be familiar, it's an area of central Manchester which is highly pedestrianised. It's almost being seen as kind of like, I guess, the innovation district of Manchester. And again, for them, this is a private organisation that we're working with. So appeal group who work very closely with Salford City Council, and really their goals are very similar to local authorities around how do we make the area sustainable for residents, people working there, the university students, visitors, all of those different audiences. And really their problem was they didn't have the capabilities or tools to understand all of those evolving audiences on a continuous basis. Really, you know, their status quo was send someone out with a clipboard for, you know, a very small splice of data, or, you know, host an event or a town hall meeting to try and understand those. But also they're doing so much with events and new businesses arriving. You know, they really struggle outside of kind of social media. How do we, people who are there experiencing the area, how do we get that information out to people that can be adapted over time as well? And we're really forming part of their placemaking strategy. So they're very keen, and they're driven by the council to actually integrate the culture and heritage of that area. You know, it's historically significant. It's on the docks, which has a, you know, really rich industrial history, and they're very keen on weaving those stories into that area. And we're forming like an integral part of that. You know, essentially telling the stories through the objects that are there. A really different one is, I mentioned we're working with, starting to work with central government agencies. So we now work with the Environment Agency. And for them, it's all about behavior change around an education around flood resilience. So this is a floodgate, which little did we know, not many people know what it is, let alone what it does. So this is just one really small example of how we're working with them, activating objects which they've put in place, but also just inanimate generic objects to let people know, you know, what the risk is to where that location is in terms of flooding. Do people know the risk to their home and where they live, what they can do to help flood resilience and that risk, where to find out more resource, build the awareness around the risk and the ambitions for the Environment Agency in helping communities with flood resilience, and also answer people's queries. So, you know, what is this? What is this floodgate? All the way through to, you know, how do I improve my risk resilience? So a really nice, just different example. And then we move to something a bit more probably local to everyone on this webinar. So we're now working with Gwynedd Council, with the first pilot being in Porthmadog, which is Hello Port, and very similar to I guess a lot of the examples that I've mentioned. So we're activating a number of different objects from benches to the harbour to lampposts, and more. I think we've activated 60 or so objects across the town. And we're working with, obviously, Mentormon in conjunction with this. And really, the purpose on an ongoing basis is better education, better provision of information, providing those community touch points, which, you know, don't currently exist, whether it be about council's plans, what there is to do in the area, you know, COVID guidance, all the way through to gathering people's feedback and sentiment in a really low barrier to entry way. And really the output is aimed to build public trust with decision makers, improve decision-making efficiency. Not sure why my slide has frozen. There we go. Improve local decision-making efficiency, attract local spending, and also promote kind of Welsh heritage. And that's kind of why we've integrated the Welsh language as well as English on signage, like on this lamppost here. And I've just pulled a couple of stats so far. So we haven't actually been live very long, but these are some of the stats that are already coming out. So, and an example of questions that might be asked. So how would you describe this street in one word? And for that particular question, 53% of people have described it in a positive way. And that's just an example of how we're kind of analysing sentiment in real time. How noisy was another priority to understand. So over 50% said they thought it was a little noisy or more. And then what's the main reason for visiting Porthmadog? And that's just, I guess a bit of insight of, you know, visitors versus residents versus people working there. And 60% of users said that they are visiting the reason for visiting is that they lived in the town. Sorry, so most of the residents engaging most of the users engaging are residents. So just a little bit of a flavour so far of kind of some of the stats that we're drawing out. And I would say that those questions being asked is completely customizable. So we have a bank and a knowledge base that we can provide, but that knowledge base can be added to, adapted, edited, really according to the priorities of the local authorities or the organisations that we're working with. And that's just another example. So I think this is at the rail station, an object chatting to someone. And just to explain that a bit more, I don't know if everyone may have seen this, but this is Rihanna Mentomon that we're working with. Just a little bit of an explainer video. Hopefully this works.
As towns and cities begin to emerge from the challenges of coronavirus, local decision makers are beginning to redefine a sense of place to try rebuild the connection back into the community. In order to bring both community and the public together, Arddangosfa Gwneud has launched Hello Port. This is a pilot which will provide people with easier access to local information and will allow the people of Porthmadog, including visitors, to feed back on the area. At the end of the pilot, we will share your feedback with decision makers and aim to make better decisions about the real needs and interests of the community. So how does Hello Port work and how can you take part? Look out for any street object with a purple sign and a QR code on it. They are through the high street, at the park, at the harbour and also at the Welsh Highland Railway. Say hello by either scanning the QR code by opening the camera on your phone or text the phone number by choosing the language you wish to use. Add the text instruction and press send. You'll soon get a reply from the friendly object. Keep chatting to learn more about the local area and please share your thoughts and feedback.
So that, I guess, gives you an idea of what we're doing in Hello Port. And just to finish off, I just thought it would be useful to understand a bit more practicalities about how to deploy Hello Lamp Post. So, as I mentioned before, our commercial way of working is on a license basis. So typically local authorities will take out an annual or multi-year license, which, like it says on the screen, can accommodate a multitude of use cases, projects. So often councils will have a number of objects activated in the community permanently, and then they might have events or projects that are happening temporarily that they'll drag and drop some objects. Worth mentioning that the content that sits behind those conversations doesn't have to remain the same for a whole year. That is constantly adapting, and that's part of our service, is understanding those changing needs from local authorities and translating that into the system. We typically try and allow up to 8 weeks from kind of giving the go-ahead to go live on the street, and that's just to allow us things like understanding the priorities, building the system and the knowledge base, designing the artwork for the signs and providing that to be installed and or printed and installed. But from our perspective, launch dates are completely flexible according to whoever we're working with. I kind of alluded there just around guidance and providing the artwork for signs. Again, like you saw with Hello Port, that is normally customized according to council or local area branding. And then as part of our license and service, there's no extra fees. All of our ongoing support, maintenance, dedicated account managers, that's all kind of wrapped in. Yeah, I've already mentioned the point about adapting according to priorities, but yeah, we are there to help. We want decision makers to be able to make more efficient decisions, and we want people to have easier access to local information. So we will adapt the platform accordingly. And then, yeah, pretty much as soon as the signs are up and people start interacting, you have access to a real-time dashboard, and we'll then be providing regular reporting in terms of trends and insights that we're spotting from having a look through interactions. And I think that might be on my last slide. Yeah, I hope that was useful, interesting, but yeah, I think we've got plenty of time if anyone does have any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Sy'n. And maybe if you want to leave that last slide up there so that people can have time to write your contact details down. Yeah, thank you very much for today's presentation. Well done on the Welsh pronunciations, by the way. Some difficult words in there.
I was concerned I was going to be butchering them, so apologies. Yeah.
Now, Porthmadog is not an easy one. Mentermon either. It's not very easy, so well done. I've written down a few questions which were later answered in your presentation, but I'll still ask them because I think they're questions that maybe some people might have missed, and I think the answers are really important as well. So I think it's important to make clear that this is a platform that doesn't require an app or an account, which sometimes is probably a big barrier for technologies to be deployed in towns. I'm correct in saying that, aren't I?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, I said it a few times, but one of our underlying, I guess, product pillars from our strategy is to lower barriers to entry. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no account to create. There's no app to download. You don't even need a smartphone. You can just do it on SMS. And because of that, you know, the base experience of Hello Lamp Post is anonymous. And what we found that does as well is because it's anonymous and because there's, you know, it's a super low barrier to entry, it allows people to be a bit more honest and be a bit more comfortable with the platform. And that's what I think why Hello Lamp Post is so good at gathering qualitative data.
Yeah, thank you. Just so you're aware, Rhian, who starred in the video, is also present in today's webinar, and she's asked the question, what inspired you to start the business?
Good question. Well, in complete truth, we never intended it at the beginning to be a business. You know, this was meant to be an inspiring digital art installation in Bristol in 2013, born out of behavioral observations when we moved through cities and frustration around not being able to easily communicate with local decision makers, to share my thoughts, opinions, feedback as a busy, you know, professional. You know, massive frustration with myself and my co-founders around, you know, little things like, you know, giving my feedback on the cleanliness of a street or feedback on a planning consultation, having to go through various hoops around filling forms out or, you know, finding the resource myself. Actually, you know, that frustration was part of the reason why we came up with the original concept. But yeah, I mean, we never intended it to be a business. It was quite nice and serendipitous that, you know, cities and towns were getting in touch with us, you know, like Malmo and San Francisco and Austin to utilize this product or service. And it was just by chance really that we realized actually this is providing really great value to us as citizens and users, but also these organizations who maybe sometimes lack insight into the wider communities.
Yeah, I hope that answered the question, Rhian. I think it did. And I think you touched upon it in your presentation, but this is a technology that's easily scalable. Some smart solutions out there, smart city solutions, it's sometimes difficult to imagine how they could be scaled down to a town level, because a town doesn't obviously generate as much data in terms of using IoT sensors and so on. So this is a platform that doesn't require big infrastructure, and it can be scaled easily. Like you demonstrated, like a section of London in the Olympic Park. You can scale it down to just, you know, small locations, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it is worth reiterating, you know, we don't make or install any hardware. There's no sensors involved. You know, all that needs putting in place is those basic signs with the QR code. So yeah, consequently, that allows us to activate one statue or, one bench if needs be. Not that we've ever done it, on that small scale, but or hundreds or thousands of benches and lampposts across a town or a city. Scaled down, I think, one of the smallest populations we worked with is Lerwick in the Shetland Islands, where, they don't have masses of infrastructure and they don't have, a sprawling city. But, we customized a scale that works for them. That's, enough objects that it will engage the community, but not overkill that we have the expectations that it's going to be a city. So yeah, it's completely flexible, and equally with our services. If it's one consultation a year that needs doing, or it's continuous engagement across the town across the year, then that's scalable too.
Yeah, and that follows on nicely to one question. Another question that I had here was, not only do you provide the technology, but you also provide the service of performing the analytics, which I know is, again, a barrier that does face councils, local authorities, and towns. Is sometimes they don't have the capacity and the resources to do that deep dive that you mentioned, but that does come as part of the service that Hello Lamp Post offers, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think if there's one thing that that we've learned through doing this business is that local authorities are, super stretched and super time poor. So that side of the business, we've tried to make, as easy as possible to get access and visibility on those insights and what people think and want and need. So that's why we try and do all, if not most, of the heavy lifting. From an analytics perspective, from a setup perspective. So just going to the practicalities of it, I guess, is some of it is automated, or a lot of it is automated using natural language processing and sentiment analysis. And then, like I said, part of our service is actually us doing some interpretive analysis and providing that back. So, and again, we're completely flexible in how we provide that back. Some of the local authorities we work with, we have a weekly call with, and we present those insights back to them. Some want them directly in their inbox. Some want them, automatically sent onto a Teams channel that they have internally. Some only want them quarterly or half yearly. Again, it's completely adaptable.
Yeah, and I guess you referred to a case study in Sydney where they actually used these insights that you were providing them to make plans for the city, which I guess is kind of what the overall purpose of the Year of Smart Towns project is. We want to be able to help towns and local authorities to have tools like this in place that can steer plans for the future. One question that's come in, and Rhian did answer the question, was around, you do get some people that might misuse some of the signs, send in prank text. Does this affect when it comes to the analytics? Do these sort of things affect the insights that you're able to provide your clients?
So generally, I guess the short answer is no. We have issues, no, with prank texts. Obviously, you do get the occasional person, and we're talking probably less than 2 or 3% of total interactions. There's a couple of pieces here. So one, if there's any swearing, the system automatically recognizes that and kind of will respond in a very humanistic way. So it might say, hey, that's rude, or, hey, that hurt my feelings. And then it will carry on with the conversation and ask them another question. Because objects are always asking people questions and continuing the conversation, they're almost on rails in some way. So it doesn't give them much opportunity to go really off course and try and prank the system. On the analytics side, it doesn't create a great amount of work. Either it's picked up, left off in insights automatically, or when we're doing that manual interpretation, we'll only include the answers from people that are relevant.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hope that answered your question, Isabel. So essentially, Hello Lamp Post is not only a tool for local authorities and the decision makers, but like you said, it's a platform that you can put frequently asked questions in. It's a platform to help citizens as well. It's not all about gathering data. It's also providing that support and help to the visitors, to the residents of the town as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, like I said, we often work on a number of different use cases at once. Some of it's trails, even like Christmas trails we're starting to set up now, where it's, providing an interesting, entertaining, fun experience, educational sometimes when it's about, culture and history, all the way through to, transport efficiencies. So, interacting with parking meters to understand how much parking is and where to park, live bus times, etc. All the way through to what we class as generic objects, which is meant to be, giving people information about local amenities, local events, as well as local plans. So when a council tells us, right, well, we've got this initiative coming up, and it might be as small as planting some more trees, it might be as large as a master plan for that area. It's then that we're able to feed that information to people.
Questions come in from Aled, which is a very good question. So obviously this data that you're collecting is all anonymous, but is there a way that you can know if you're engaging with those hard to reach audiences? And I guess potentially, I don't know if you can, but you said earlier in the presentation that the platform recognizes users who've used it before and new ones. So could you potentially have some statistics to tell you this number of people used the platform this month, 20% of them were new, whereas 80% of them were repeated visitors or repeated?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can get very granular in that detail or stay very high level. So we can, say how many interactions have happened through the platform all the way through to, X number of people have returned, or X number of people have answered X number of questions, or X number of people have interacted with 5 objects or more. All of these stats, yeah, we keep track of. Just in terms of the anonymous and harder to reach question. So what I mean by anonymous is, as standard, it's anonymous. So if someone just interacts and the base experience of questions is anonymous, however, we have the ability to gather indicative demographics about audiences. And we do that in one of 2 ways. One is because we have the ability to direct people to links within conversations. For example, we could say, if you'd like to provide more feedback, or you'd like more information, like head to this link, and then there's a separate form which asks them for more information. And that might be commentary, but it might also be information about them. The other way is we actually can do it through questioning. So actually asking people, a variety of date ranges, or where they've traveled from, or do they live in the area, etc., etc. So we start to gather a picture, and again, that's customizable according to the priorities. So some councils, that doesn't really matter. They'll target the harder to reach by geography, so activating objects within the areas that they consider harder to reach. Some it's, we need to understand the demographics. So Sydney's a great example of that, where I think we increased their reach with what they would call a harder to reach demographic by, I think it was about 120, 150% compared to what they were used to, with regards to gathering input from that harder to reach audience, which was Indigenous people or people of an Indigenous descent, which is super important for them going forward to make sure they're representing that audience in how they're shaping that area going forward. So yeah, as standard, it's anonymous, but there are definitely ways where we can understand demographics or information about those harder to reach audiences.
I guess by having the statistics that you mentioned in the first part of that answer, would the council or whoever was responsible for a town trial, they could use kind of those statistics to maybe change where their objects or decide on where they want to put their objects. So if, for example, a bench gets no real use, they could they change where that sign would go so that it could target or could engage with those harder to reach audiences?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and that comes back to the flexibility, I guess. Throughout the year or throughout license periods, adding new objects, changing objects, removing them, changing the content behind them. That's all customizable. It's all flexible.
Okay, great. I hope that answered your question, Aled. In terms of the questions that the platform asks, I guess, do you help the organizations to come up with these questions? How much work is involved in creating the questions? And is there kind of a limit on how many questions can be asked?
So no limit. The knowledge base is as big as we like it to be. And it can also depend on use cases. So to give you an idea, all objects can have the same conversation type, or every single object can have a different type of conversation. So give you an example, a historical trail, for example, each of those objects are going to be talking about the trail, the history of the area, the history of that statue. Whereas you could have 100 lampposts, which will all have a very similar conversation type. When you go from lamppost to lamppost, it'll be a different experience, but in terms of narrative and theme, they might be all talking about the same thing. In terms of work involved, so we've got a knowledge base that exists. We've obviously worked with 40 odd different locations around the world. So we do have banks and packages of content which might relate to a consultation or visitor satisfaction, etc. And we can almost plug and play those. So if a council said to us, our first priority is culture and general visitor satisfaction, then we can almost pull out blocks from our existing knowledge base. We'll obviously show that to the customer, but that's adaptable, editable. You can add to it, you can remove it. But yeah, we've almost got kind of an out-of-the-box part, which is customizable. In terms of work involved, yeah, we definitely work with every local authority, and that's kind of forms part of the setup phase. Is what I said, about understanding their priorities, understanding community priorities, and making sure that it's shaped accordingly. And then we go through kind of a testing phase as well, just to make sure that everything's in line with expectation.
Yeah, I'm hope that Rhian won't mind me saying this, but from the conversations that I've had with her, it's been your support with Hello Ports has been great, and if any other town who might be watching this webinar in the webinar with us today or watching it at a later time, Rhian has spoken very highly of Hello Ports, and the whole experience has been great. It is coming up to 1 o'clock now. If anybody else does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I've learned a lot more about Hello Lamp Post today. I know we've had conversations before, Tiernan, but the presentation that you gave today, you gave a great summary of it and how it's been deployed in other places as well. Hopefully, the fact that you're doing this trial in Porthmadog as well, having that Welsh language option is something that's very valuable, and it'd be great to see other towns maybe looking into having it for their towns as well. Seeing as all this work's gone into having it in Welsh as well, it'd be a wasted opportunity not to trial it in other towns across Wales. And as part of the Year of Smart Towns, we are very interested in the trial that's currently going on in Porthmadog, and we really want to evaluate kind of how the deployment has happened and provide other towns with lessons learned. So if they're interested, they can contact us to find out, what needs to be done, what needs to be in place. And essentially, they can also contact you, can't they? If they
I'll put this back up just in case anyone missed it. But yeah, my email is just tiernan@hlp.city. But yeah, happy to take any questions, happy to arrange another call with anyone.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed today's webinar. I hope that others did as well. I do know that when I finish this webinar, everybody's going to disappear. So I'd like to thank you, Tiernan, for presenting today, and also to thank everybody who's attended. And please do register for all our other webinars as well. So yeah, thank you very much, Tiernan.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, and thanks everyone for joining.
Okay, have a nice day.
Cheers.
See ya.